The late afternoon sun spilled over Red Hollow like honey over dust, catching on the warped window glass of the old saloon and the rusted horseshoes nailed above its doors. The air was dry, thick with the smell of forge smoke and the distant sounds of the countryside. Folks paused when the stranger rode in, one hand gripping the reins tight, the other resting awkwardly on his thigh like it was something that didn't belong to him anymore. Jack Rourke didn't look up much. Didn't have reason to. The war had taken that. His eyes, once bright with a soldier's purpose, now fixed mostly on the road in front of him. The limp gave him away before anyone could ask. His horse was tired, its steps uneven as they reached the center of town. From the porch of the general store, an old man muttered to no one in particular. "Another drifter. Bet he'll be gone by sundown." Someone else spat into the dust. "Or beggin' by mornin'." Jack dismounted slowly, keeping his weight off the left leg. He tied his horse outside the boarding house and nodded to the innkeeper, a plump woman with arms strong from years of hauling water and opinion alike. "Rooms are $2 a week," she said, giving him the kind of look that measured a man faster than he could measure himself. "Cheaper if you ain't trouble." Jack's voice came quiet, worn at the edges. "Ain't trouble, ma'am. Just passing through." She squinted at the limp, then the faded Union blue peeking beneath his coat. "You fought?" He hesitated, throat tightening around the word. "Once. That was enough to spread before he'd even climbed the stairs." Red Hollow was small, the kind of town where secrets didn't last longer than a whisper. By sundown, half the street knew about the soldier with the limp who didn't talk about the war. By morning, they knew worse, that he hadn't finished it. Jack tried finding work anyway. He fixed a fence outside the stable and offered to help with wagon wheels. No one would meet his eye long enough to answer. By noon, even the smithy door was shut to him. He stood there longer than pride would allow, hand resting on the charred post, staring at what used to be a working forge. The blackened timbers still carried a faint scent of smoke and iron. The place had been burned clean through, rafters fallen inward like ribs cracked open. A voice called from behind. "You looking to steal tools or mend something?" He turned. The woman approaching wasn't what he expected. Tall for her build, sleeves rolled past her elbows, a smear of soot along one cheek. Her eyes, steady as cooled iron, held no fear, only curiosity. "Nora Bell," she said, offering a hand he didn't take. "My father's shop. Raiders took it down 2 weeks ago." Jack glanced back at the ruin. "Sorry to hear." "Sorry, don't fix a roof," she replied, chin lifting slightly. "You any good with a hammer?" He let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "It was better before the leg." "Well," she said, looking him over, "I don't need a runner. Just someone who knows what they're doing." He frowned. "You sure?" "Words out, I'm not much for finishing fights." Her mouth twitched, half smile, half dare. "I don't need a fighter either. I need someone who'll stay till the work's done." Jack hesitated, eyes drifting toward the forge ruins again. "Why me?" "Because everyone else said no," she said simply. "And because I don't believe everything I hear." He studied her for a long moment. The wind stirred dust between them, and with it came that old familiar ache, guilt pressing where the wound had healed wrong. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Miss Bell, I'll help. But don't expect much." She turned toward the wrecked doorway, grabbing a half-bent shovel. "Good. I've had my fill of men expecting too much of themselves." Jack followed, slow and deliberate, into the skeleton of the forge. As they worked, clearing charred boards, setting the first posts back into place, the townsfolk passed by and murmured judgment. "That's the deserter," someone whispered. Nora Bell's lost her mind, but she didn't flinch. Each swing of her hammer rang clearer, louder, until even the whispers faded under the rhythm. Jack, sweat tracing the lines of his jaw, felt something stir he hadn't known he'd buried. Purpose, faint but real. When the day's light began to fade, Nora looked over at him, wiping soot from her brow. "You said you're just a man fixing what's broke," she said softly. "That's all this town ever needed." He didn't answer. But for the first time in years, Jack Rourke lifted his head and met the horizon without shame. By the second week, Red Hollow had chosen its villain and its fool. The villain, Jack Rourke, the deserter with the limp. The fool, Nora Bell, the blacksmith's daughter who'd hired him anyway. They said she was too kind for her own good. They said a woman alone ought not spend her days beside a man who couldn't even finish a war. The words hung like smoke around the forge, drifting in every time someone came to check on progress, but stayed only long enough to sneer. Nora never flinched. Jack did. He'd hear them from the alley or the well, snide laughter carried on the wind. A coward swinging hammers for a woman, fittin'. Sometimes he clenched his fist, sometimes he just worked harder. The hammer's rhythm became his only defense, the sound of iron striking an anvil drowning out everything else. One afternoon, he caught Nora staring after a group of gossiping wives leaving the shop. Her face was calm, but the muscle in her jaw ticked. "You shouldn't take it personally," Jack said, brushing soot off his hands. She looked up at him, that steady gaze cutting through his attempt at distance. "I don't. They just talk so they don't have to listen to themselves." He almost smiled. Almost. She nodded toward the half-built roof frame. "You swing cleaner when you stop thinking." "You were a smith once?" Jack shook his head. "Carpenter. My brother was the one who worked with iron. His voice thinned, lost in the clang of her hammer. "He didn't make it back." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be." He believed in the fight. "I didn't." Her next strike landed heavy. "Maybe believing's what broke him. Maybe living's what makes you brave." Jack didn't answer. He went back to work, the words staying with him longer than he liked. By the end of the week, the forge began to breathe again. The walls stood straight, the frame strong. The smell of pine resin and oil filled the air, mixing with the faint memory of smoke. Folks still passed by, pretending not to look, but some of them paused, curiosity creeping in where judgment had lived. Jack kept his head down, content to let Nora talk to customers if they even came. But one morning, a shadow fell across the door that didn't belong to any local. He knew that stance before he saw the face. Sergeant Will Cates, once his commanding officer. A man carved from stone and loyalty, sharp eyes colder than any winter. Cates leaned against the doorframe, his boots dusted with the long trail behind him. "Heard there was a man here by the name of Jack Rourke." Nora turned, cautious but polite. "Maybe there is. Depends who's asking." "Name's Cates, Army." He flashed a silver badge that wasn't official anymore but still carried the weight of authority. "I'm looking for a deserter. Walks with a limp. Left his post the night before Appomattox." Jack froze by the back wall, hands curling around the hammer. He didn't breathe until Nora spoke. "You just described half the men who survived," she said coolly. "What's your business with him?" Kate smiled without warmth. "Justice. Some debts don't end when the guns stop." Jack stepped forward then, silent until he reached the forge light. "No need to trouble the lady, Sergeant." "I'm here." Nora's head snapped toward him, eyes searching. Cates gave a satisfied nod. "Didn't figure you'd run again." "Not this time." Jack wiped his hands on his apron, voice steady but low. "I'm done running, but I ain't got much left to give either." "You'll give the Army its due," Cates said. "There's a marshal coming through Red Hollow next week. He'll be happy to take you in." Nora stepped between them before Jack could speak. "You come into my shop making threats, you best have more than old War Ghost to back 'em." Cates tipped his hat, his smirk like a knife's edge. "War ghosts don't die easily, Miss Bell, especially when they've got cowards to haunt." He left, boot heels echoing down the street. Jack stood in the silence that followed, the forge light flickering across his face. "I'll leave by nightfall," he said finally. Nora's brow furrowed. "That man's poison, not justice." "Maybe," Jack said, pulling off his apron. "But I brought the poison here." As dusk settled, he packed his things quietly. Nora watched from the doorway, hands blackened from soot and stubbornness. "You think leaving will clean your name?" she asked. He hesitated. "No, but maybe it'll spare yours." She stepped closer, voice low but firm. "You fix a roof, help a stranger, work till your hands shake, and you still call that shame? Folks don't need sparing, Jack. They need proof that a man can come back from hell and keep walking." Her words stopped him cold. He looked at her then, the kind of look that holds both gratitude and grief. "I don't know if I can." "Then let me believe it till you do," she said. He turned away, throat tightening. "You deserve better than me." Nora's answer came softly, steady as a hammer on steel. "Maybe. But right now, I deserve truth more than I deserve better." The night after Kate's visit brought a silence that didn't feel natural. Even the wind seemed to hush, as if the town itself were waiting to see what Jack Rourke would do. He lay awake in the loft above the boarding house, staring at the cracked ceiling while moonlight pooled through the window. Sleep didn't come easily to him. It has never had it since the war. Every creak of the floorboards below, every faint sound from the street carried echoes of cannon fire and orders shouted across the fields. He'd told Nora he'd leave. But his horse still stood tied outside, unsaddled. By dawn, he was back at the forge, alone, working like a man trying to outpace his own shadow. The hammer struck with a rhythm that hurt his arm but kept his mind quiet. Nora arrived not long after, pausing in the doorway to watch him. Her father's old apron hung loose around her waist, the smell of iron and ash clinging to her. "I thought you'd be gone by now," she said softly. Jack didn't look up. "Still might be. Then why are you fixing my bellows?" He stopped mid-swing. The truth rose and fell in his chest like a tide. "Because I started it, and I don't walk away from what I start anymore." Nora nodded once, like that was the only answer she'd accept. She took up a hammer beside him without another word. They worked in silence for a long while. But silence with Nora wasn't heavy. It had room for breath, for thought, for the sound of two lives slowly remembering how to build instead of break. When the sun reached its highest, she set her tools down and leaned against the half-built wall. "You gonna tell me what happened?" He didn't answer right away, but she didn't move either. Her stillness was patient, unyielding in the way the strongest metals are. Finally Jack spoke, voice low and gravel-worn. "My brother's name was Eli. We enlisted together, farm boys from Kansas who thought dying for a flag would make us men." He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the glowing coals. "We fought through Tennessee, Virginia. Then came the last days. Everything was ending, but the command wouldn't stop sending us forward. Eli took a bullet to the chest outside Petersburg. I carried him half a mile before he was gone." He paused, breath shuddering. "After that I walked away. Left the field, the company, the orders. I figured there wasn't anything left worth fighting for." Nora didn't look away, didn't try to fill the silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but sure. "You ran from war, not from honor." He gave a hollow laugh. "That's not what they'll call it. Kates'll see to that." "Let him," she said, standing straighter. "A man's worth ain't decided by who names his sins." Jack turned toward her then, eyes glassy under the forge light. "You talk like you've never done wrong." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment the iron in her steadiness wavered. "I've done worse than run," she said quietly, "but I don't let it own me anymore." Their gazes held, something wordless, raw, and human passing between them like a spark jumping from steel to flame. That evening, the sound of bootsteps returned to the shop door. Kate stood there again, framed by dusk, his hat shadowing his face. "Marshal's due in 2 days," he said, voice cool. "Best we settle this without making a scene." Jack wiped his hands on a rag. "You got a warrant?" "Don't need one." "You deserted." "I was there," Nora stepped forward. "And I was here." "He's paid his dues." Kate's eyes flicked to her, hard and disdainful. "Lady, I'd keep my nose out of soldiers' matters if I were you." "This man left others to die. That war took enough, she shot back. You can't keep burying men in it. Kate smirked, but there was something uneasy behind it. Maybe you think you can hammer his sins into horseshoes, but they don't melt that easily. Jack set his hammer down steady. If you're taking me, I won't fight. Nora's hand clenched at her side. You can't mean that. He met her eyes with quiet finality. I've been running long enough. Kate's nodded once. Marshall's here day after tomorrow. He'll be ready. When the sergeant left, Nora rounded on Jack, her voice trembling, not with fear but fury. You just hand yourself over to be hanged? Like it'll fix anything? Jack's answer was barely a whisper. Maybe it fixes me. She shook her head, tears bright in her eyes, though none fell. You think punishment's the same as peace? You don't get to trade your life for forgiveness. He looked away, shame cutting deep. Then tell me what I deserve, Nora. Her voice steadied, low and fierce. You deserve the chance to make something of what's left. He wanted to believe her. God, he did. But the sound of Kate's boots fading into the night told him that time was running out, and that maybe peace would only come when the past finally caught up. The next day dawned with a heaviness that hung over Red Hollow like a storm waiting to break. Jack worked at the forge until his palms split. He didn't speak much, and when he did, it was mostly to the metal, murmured words that sounded like penance. Nora kept beside him, watching him shape the last of the horseshoes they'd promised the livery stable. Each strike of his hammer rang louder than sense, the sound hard enough to make her flinch. Jack, she said finally, her tone gentle but firm. You'll break the anvil before the metal. He stopped, breath ragged. Maybe that's the point. She set her hammer down and stepped closer. No, you break, there's no fixin' left. He looked at her then, eyes bloodshot, face smudged with soot and sorrow. You don't understand. Every mile I've walked since that field has been borrowed. Men better than me died because I couldn't stomach one more order. Nora shook her head. You didn't kill them, Jack. Didn't save them either. She didn't move away. That's not shame talking. That's grief still looking for a place to land. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the hiss of the forge filled the silence. Finally, he said, When Kate's comes, I'll go quiet. No fight, you don't need to be dragged into it. Dragged? She laughed bitterly. You think standing by a man's decency is a drag? He opened his mouth to answer, but the sound of boots and voices from outside cut him short. The saloon across the street was louder than usual. Angry laughter, glasses breaking, Kate's gravelly voice carrying above the rest. Jack's jaw tightened. He's stirring it. Nora stepped to the door. Then we don't let him. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with smoke and whiskey fumes. Kate sat at a card table near the back, sleeves rolled, gun belt slung low on his hips. Around him, a few townsmen leaned close, their faces tight with drink and unease. Jack entered first, quiet but deliberate. Conversations dulled as soon as he stepped through the door. Well, if it ain't the ghost himself, Kate's drawled, leaning back in his chair. Didn't expect you to come walking in here on your own. I came to keep peace, Jack said evenly. Kate smirked. Peace? You had your chance at that 4 years ago. Men were dying and you walked, the crowd murmured. Jack's hand stayed still at his side. I walked because my brother was already gone, he said quietly, and because no one deserved to die one more day for pride. Kate slammed his glass down. You think that makes it noble? You think that wipes the blood off your hands? Before Jack could reply, Nora appeared at the door. Her voice cut through the rising noise like the ring of steel. That's enough. Every eye turned. She stepped forward, unafraid, the firelight catching the soot on her face like war paint. This man's done more good with 2 hands and half a leg than most of you'll ever do sober, she said, glaring around the room. You call him a coward, fine. But tell me, which one of you's brave enough to forgive? The silence that followed was sharp. Kate's rose slowly. Lady, you best not make me choose between manners and justice. Justice? She said, voice steady. Or revenge for the war you still can't leave behind. His face darkened. You don't know what I carry. Then stop making others pay for it. The tension snapped. Kate's moved first, hand dropping toward his gun. Jack lunged, not to draw but to shield. The shot cracked through the room. Nora gasped as Jack stumbled, clutching his shoulder. The bullet had grazed him, but blood spread fast. Kate's froze, gun still smoking. The crowd rose in shouts, chairs scraping, curses flying. Enough! Nora's voice tore through the chaos. She stepped in front of Jack, fury blazing. You'll shoot an unarmed man because he chose mercy over murder? That ain't justice, that's cowardice. Kate's face twisted, but the men around him began to falter. A few stepped forward. One grabbed the sergeant's arm, another pushed the barrel toward the floor. Put it down, Kates, someone muttered. You've done enough. He resisted, but the tide had turned. The crowd's anger, once aimed at Jack, now burned toward the man who'd fired. Kate's gun clattered onto the floor. Jack, still standing through pale, met the sergeant's eyes. It's over, Will. Let it die. Kate's looked around, saw the faces he'd failed to sway, and stormed out into the street, swallowed by the night. The saloon slowly emptied. Nora stayed beside Jack, pressing a torn cloth to his shoulder. You fool, she whispered, trembling. You didn't even raise your gun. He gave a faint smile. Didn't see the point. I've done enough fighting. She stared at him, tears threatening now. You could have been killed. Would have been worth it, he said quietly. If it meant you'd be safe. Her breath hitched and she pressed her hand over his. Don't you ever say that again. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain falling steadily on Red Hollow, washing dust from the wooden boards and blood from the street. Inside the forge, the last embers glowed red against the dark, as if the fire itself refused to die. The rain fell steadily all through the night, drumming on the forge roof like a heartbeat that refused to quit. Red Hollow for once was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after too much noise, when folks start thinking instead of talking. Jack sat on the steps outside the forge, shoulder bandaged, coat damp from the drizzle. The bullet had grazed deep, but the doctor said it'd heal clean if he rested. Rest, though, was a thing he'd never learned how to do. He watched the muddy street, the lamplight trembling in puddles. Somewhere down the road a dog barked. He heard voices too, people talking in low tones. They weren't about him anymore. Or maybe they were, but without the spit and venom, he couldn't tell. Behind him, Nora moved around the shop, quiet as the rain. The forge fire burned low, her silhouette framed against it. She'd stayed up tending it long after he told her to go home. You should sleep, he said without turning. Can't, she answered. Too much in my head. Jack gave a tired chuckle. That makes two of us. She came to stand beside him, hands tucked into her apron pockets. Kate's left town at dawn. Folks helped him pack. No one said a word to him. Jack nodded slowly. That a mercy or a sentence? Maybe both. They stood there in the drizzle, the smell of wet earth thick in the air. The silence between them was no longer sharp. It had softened like metal cooled after the hammer. Finally, Nora said, You still plan on leaving? He looked down at his bandaged arm. I should. There's a marshal coming through tomorrow. My name will still be on his list. And if it is? She asked. He gave a small, bitter smile. Then I'll save him the trouble. Her eyes flashed in the lamplight. You think walking away again will make you free? He didn't answer. He couldn't. Nora knelt to pick up a stray nail, turning it between her fingers. You know what my pa used to say? You can't build a life out of running boards. You need anchors. She looked at him. This place could be yours too if you'd let it. Jack's throat tightened. I don't belong here, Nora. She rose to her feet, rain catching in her lashes. You do to me. That silenced him. For the first time, he had no words. Later, when the rain finally stopped, Jack went down to the river. The sky was just starting to pale, the kind of soft gray before dawn that makes everything look clean again. He stood there, his reflection trembling on the water, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. He didn't hear Nora approach. Her boots were quiet on the wet grass. Thought you'd be halfway out by now, she said. I tried, he murmured. Didn't get far. Good. She stepped beside him. I figured you'd be too stubborn to quit running without saying goodbye. He looked at her and something inside him gave way, slow, aching, but sure. I don't know what to do, Nora. I've carried shame longer than I carried a rifle. Don't reckon I know who I am without it. She studied him, eyes full of quiet strength. Then maybe it's time you stop carrying it alone. Jack exhaled, long and shaking. You already know what I am. I know what you've done, she said softly. But that ain't who you are. He looked down at his hands, scarred, rough, stained from years of labor and regret. You deserve better than me. Nora smiled faintly, rain-dark hair falling against her cheek. I already knew your worth before you ever tried to prove it. Something inside him broke, not in pain, but in release. His breath caught, shoulders trembling as he finally let the words he'd buried rise. I wanted to die that day. He whispered, when Eli fell. Thought maybe if I lived, it'd mean nothing. But you... He swallowed hard. You make living mean something again. Nora reached up, her hand resting against his face, thumb brushing the edge of an old scar. Then stay. Stay and make it mean more. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, the river murmuring beside them like a promise. By the time the first light touched Red Hollow, they were walking back toward town together. Jack's limp was slower than usual, but lighter somehow. Behind them, the river carried away the last of the rain, and with it, a soldier's ghosts. Ahead, the forge waited, unfinished, but standing strong. For the first time since the war, Jack Rourke wasn't running from anything. He was walking toward something worth keeping. Weeks passed, and Red Hollow settled into something quieter, something almost like peace. The forge, once a ruin of ash and twisted beams, stood tall again, its roof mended, its walls straight, and its chimney puffing steady gray smoke that rose into the morning sky like a promise kept. Inside, the ring of hammer on iron filled the air, joined now by two rhythms, Jack's slower, deliberate strokes beside Nora's clean, confident strikes. Together, they worked in near silence, save for the hiss of quenched steel and the soft hum of her voice when she thought he wasn't listening. Outside, the townsfolk started coming back. First one or two, then more each week. Men who'd once spat in the dust now brought their horses to be shod. Women who'd whispered behind their hands now lingered at the doorway, offering coins and cautious smiles. No one spoke about the night at the saloon anymore. No one had to. Jack didn't seek their approval. He just worked, sweat on his brow, limp still there, but easier now that his shoulders weren't so heavy. Nora, ever steady, ran the bellows and kept the pace. When customers left, she'd glance over at him, a quiet pride in her eyes that said more than any words. One morning, as sunlight spilled through the forge windows, Jack finished fitting a shoe onto a mare brought in from the livery. The horse nickered softly, brushing its muzzle against his sleeve. He smiled, patting its neck. Nora watched him from the workbench, wiping her hands on a rag. She likes you, he chuckled under his breath. Didn't figure I had that effect on any living thing? She tilted her head, that half smile of hers returning. Reckon you've surprised more than a few folks lately. Maybe even myself, he said quietly. That afternoon, the marshal rode into town. The same one Cates had spoken of weeks before. Dust trailed behind his horse as he dismounted near the sheriff's office, eyes sweeping the street. Word spread fast, as it always did. By sunset, most of the town knew the lawman had stopped in to check records, and that Jack Rourke's name might still be on them. Jack heard it too. Nora found him standing by the open forge door, watching the horizon with that old stillness. The kind that spoke of waiting for a storm you already felt in your bones. You think he's here for you? She asked quietly. Could be, he said. Men like Cates don't forget their oaths easily. Then let him come, she replied. You've already faced worse. He gave her a look, half disbelief, half admiration. You talk like faith's easy. Faith's never easy, she said, stepping close. It's just worth it. He wanted to believe her. He always had. But years of self-doubt don't wash away quickly. As twilight fell, he stepped outside, standing in the cooling dust. The marshal passed by, tipped his hat, and rode on without a word. No questions, no orders. Just a nod. When Jack turned back toward the forge, Nora was watching from the doorway, firelight at her back. "Well," she said softly. "Looks like the law's done with ghosts." He smiled faintly. "Guess that means I can stop being one." Later that night, long after the last customer had gone, Jack stood by the forge with something small in his hand. His old army tag, worn smooth by years of guilt. He turned it over between his fingers, the stamped letters barely visible anymore. Nora stepped beside him, holding a lantern. "You sure?" He nodded. "I've carried it long enough." He tossed it into the flames. The metal hissed, flared, and melted into the glowing heart of the forge. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jack said softly, "She never fixed what was broken. She just showed me it could still shine." Nora's hand found his, warm despite the heat. "You fixed it," she said. "By staying." He squeezed her hand gently. "By finally stopping." Outside, the first light of dawn touched Red Hollow, painting the town in gold. The rebuilt forge gleamed with it, hammer and anvil catching the glow. Jack Rourke stood at the doorway, shoulders square, eyes clear for the first time in years. He wasn't the man who'd ridden into town ashamed. He wasn't the deserter they'd whispered about. He was a man reborn from the fire, tempered, whole and home at last. The forge roared behind him, alive again, its flames licking the dawn. And beside him, Nora Bell smiled, because she'd never seen anyone carry light quite like that before. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more Wild West tales, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. See you on the next ride.